Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch video, and today we're looking at an absolute icon from the Rolex history, and that is the Rolex Submariner reference 5513. As with all my reviews, let's go back in time now and take a look at the history of this piece. I'll just look at the basic history of the Submariner as well, just because it gives it context. But we're going to go back in time to 1953. Back in 1953, Rolex was developing all sorts of different watches in the 50s and earlier than that, and they're kind of establishing their core range, increasing in popularity as a brand. And in the 1950s, or 53 specifically, they wanted to develop a dive watch because they hadn't done that yet, a proper dedicated diver's watch. In 1954, at Basel 1954, they released the Rolex Submariner, but it wasn't known as the Submariner officially until later on that year, as in it never featured Submariner on the actual dial until later that year. The first watch was launched alongside a very iconic dive by a diver at the time, and there were three models that were released: 6204, 6205 and 6200. 204, 205 were both 100 meter water resistant watches. 6200 was a 200 meter water resistance. And that was pretty amazing for a watch back then to have that level of water resistance. This older variant, or the first variation of the Submariner, was 36mm, so quite a bit smaller than today's 41mm case size. The watch also featured no crown guards, and kind of pencil style hands, so it was a very different looking watch to what it is now. In 1959, we've got crown guards and a slightly larger case at 40mm. We also saw in 1966 the addition of the date to the watch, and that was due to the increased popularity with non-divers, or just the general public that wanted to wear this watch and buy this watch, desk divers nicknamed. But in 1962, we saw the release of the reference 5513, which is the model that we're looking at today. And the 5513 actually had one of the longest production runs of any Rolex watch out there. The 5513 ran from 1962 all the way up until 1990. So pretty incredible production run, and that is down to its amazing popularity and fantastic design. So going back to the 60s again, 1969, we saw the introduction of the first gold variation of the Submariner. That was again due to its popularity with the general public rather than divers. So it started to become more of a status symbol and a statement piece rather than just a tool watch. And the sales were, catching up with and overtaking in some cases some of their more classic watches like Datejust and Day-Date. 10 years later, in 1979, we saw the first sapphire crystal on the Rolex Submariner, and that took the Submariner's water resistance from 200 meters now up to 300 meters. So that was a big, important milestone in the Submariner history. Again, 5513 remained in production until 1990, when it was replaced by the 14060. A few other adjustments over the years to the different product lines, but the kind of biggest jump after that was in 2009, which is when we saw the introduction of the super case with a ceramic bezel, much wider, bulkier lugs, and just a bulkier kind of case design. We first saw that released on the bimetal, and in 2010 we saw the 116610, the standard date sub, and then later in 2012 we saw the 114060, which was the no date sub in 2012. So a few different variations over the years of the Submariner. Again, that's a basic overview of the history. Let's take a look now at our 5513 that we're looking at today. Well, this specific piece here, just to give you context, is from 1982. It is a Maxi 5 dial. So it's one of the later-ish models in that line of Submariners or 5513s in terms of production here. This piece was 20 years after the release. So yeah, it's one of the later models, being Maxi 5 dial. So you will see some features on this watch being that of some of the slightly later watches in that collection. This particular piece being in amazing condition and completely unpolished, which is pretty rare for a piece of this age. Again, sorry, coming back to the clasp, we've got a really nice large clasp on this watch. It feels quite solid as well. It's not quite as solid as the modern day glide lock clasps, It features like a fold over section within or inside the clasp that allows you to extend the bracelet over a wetsuit should you want to then wear the watch with a wetsuit as well. It's pretty solid overall. They do tend to wear out over time. You know, the snap does tend to go on them, so it can be advisable to send them in for a service just to get that checked over so it doesn't fling open. But yeah, not quite as modern, as solid as the modern day versions, but still a great clasp and very, very comfortable as well. Moving on to the bracelet, we've got a nice oyster bracelet. The oyster bracelet on this feels kind of chunky. It is really kind of tool-like and industrial. Yeah, really, really nice. The links are not solid on this piece, even though they look it. They are hollow links, but they do have more of a solid feel than some of the other hollow link watches in the collection. The watch is in all brushed finish, so the bracelet and the clasp and most of the watch is in all brushed finish. Yeah, really, really nice effect. And again, matching with that kind of tool or utilitarian style of this piece. It definitely feels solid with this bracelet and chunky, and that clasp feels really, really good on the wrist. Really comfortable bracelet, nothing to say particularly interesting about this bracelet over other watches. Moving now onto the case of this watch, we've got really beautiful, elegant, thin lugs on this watch compared to modern day super case, 126 series or the 116 series of Submariners. Really, really lovely, elegant, quite flat as well, not too deep like the modern day watches. The bezel is much thinner and kind of winged compared to the modern day versions. We've got, in terms of finish, brushed on the top, polished on the sides. Really nice transition between brushed and polished around the crown guard area. A nice polished crown as well with a 200 meter water resistance on this model. Love the case on this, find it much more elegant and beautiful and suits my wrist size, as it does wear slightly smaller than the modern day versions. Modern day versions wear more like a 41mm, and this one wears more like a 39, even though it is a 40mm. Moving up onto the bezel, we've got a beautiful ghost bezel on this watch. The bezel is just magical. I love vintage Submariners purely because of this, how you can find so much variation between models in just the bezel finishes and the way they've patinaed over time, the actual case, nuances and different details that Rolex did and changed over the years with the Submariner. Yeah, lovely ghost bezel, really, really nice. Love the thinner style of the bezel on this watch. Moving now onto our dial, we've got a stunning Maxi 5, really beautifully kind of pumpkin yellowed patina dial, which is just stunning. I absolutely love it. The hands have minimal amounts of corrosion, if any, which is really rare to see on such a nice, evenly patinaed dial as well. Yeah, the patina is lovely on this piece. Really, really love the kind of matte finish on this dial. This was before they went for that kind of more shiny, glossy black finish, the lacquered black finish, which I actually personally prefer, this kind of more satin finish on this dial, and it suits itself or matches really nicely with those yellow Maxi markers. The dial is kind of this off black grey kind of colour as well, slate grey, which looks lovely. Again, really complements the yellow. I love the way that this dial is patinaed into this particular yellow. They do patina into all sorts of different colours though. Sometimes they go into more of a brown colour or a brighter yellow, or just a very, very light tint of yellow, like an off-white. So yeah, I love this one, and every patina is different because each watch has lived a different life and therefore had different exposure to the sun. This is obviously 5513, meaning it's a no-date Submariner. So this one doesn't have the date on it, but I personally think the symmetry as a result of this is really lovely, and I've always tended to move towards a no-date sub over a date sub as well. Moving on to our crystal, we've got a really beautiful plexiglass kind of plastic crystal on this watch that has this lovely domed effect. It is kind of a bit bubbly, which you don't get on the modern day subs, which have a very perfect, flat, clean sapphire crystal on top of the dial. I think this gives it much more character, and over the years of wear and tear, you add scratches to this plexiglass and it kind of gives it character as well. Overall, fantastic watch. wears beautifully on my wrist at 16.5 centimeters. Would I own this watch? 1000%. In fact, this is actually my own personal watch. And I have to be honest with you, I've not owned that many vintage watches. This is actually my first vintage Rolex that I've owned. But I've always found that I have so much more of a deeper connection with vintage watches than I do modern watches. There's just so much more character in them. The fact that this dial has aged to look like this, and the next watch that left the factory, you know, at the same time as this one would look kind of really different. So I think it's lovely that each watch has its own character and feel, and you kind of get to know the style of that piece and fall in love with those individual little details that makes this watch your watch. And I love the bezel on this watch, even though it is an aftermarket bezel. The original bezel is lovely and black and perfect, but I really like this ghost bezel on this watch. Yeah, overall fantastic piece. Personally, much prefer it to the larger modern day Submariner. Definitely the 41, I much prefer this to 41. The 40, still this wears a lot smaller. If you guys would like to see a comparison video between this and the 40, let me know. I can make that happen. Yeah, fantastic watch. I own it, and I genuinely think that I will own this watch forever, which is not something I say often at all. I tend to chop in and out of my watches because I like to, you know, experiment with all sorts of different pieces and enjoy different watches. But this one is the first watch, or maybe even ever, that I've decided I really want to keep this forever now. Thanks guys for watching. Let us know in the comments what you think of this 5513. Would you own it, or would you own a slightly different variation of these Maxi dials? Let us know if you'd maybe own a different model in the Rolex collection. And as always, if you're interested in this watch or any other watch in the Rolex collection, modern day or vintage, then let us know. Our contact details are in the description and also at the end of the video. It'll be a pleasure to call that watch into stock for you and help you out.